This is GARIS Masculist MGTOW flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 417, entitled Masculist Crushing of the Unconscious Arrogance of Feminists. Description. This flyer uses masculist arguments to crush the insufferable unconscious arrogance of feminists by listing a set of beliefs commonly held by feminists and then using masculist and masculist scientific arguments to refute them, aiming to teach these unconscious arrogant feminists that they live in a deluded fairyland that makes them look contemptible and childish to the masculists and to men in general. Now the flyer itself. Masculist Crushing of the Unconscious Arrogance of Feminists by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. I grew up in Melbourne, Australia, but hated the sagist mentality of Australia, so rejected the country at an early age of 23, then spent the next half-century living in 6 other countries: UK, Holland, Belgium, Japan, US, China. I've only been back in Oz, that's slang for Australia, for a bit over 2 years now, largely for pension reasons. Oz has lost a lot of its sageism, due largely to the internet and higher living standards, so that the upper middle class Aussies have travelled a lot and become a lot more sophisticated instead of the sport-minded peasants they were in the early 70s when I left. So with the above as my cultural background, it's not surprising that I tend to look at Aussies through the eyes of a cultural anthropologist, studying their values, their behaviours, their beliefs. I would say that in about half of the women whom I observe, they have absorbed the new women's religion of feminism. Religion is largely dead in Oz, replaced by the overpowering influence of science and modern medicine, so that children do not die young. People live healthy, long lives, so don't need religion to prop up lives as lived by their grandparents when half their children died. People were poor and miserable and needed a belief system that promised them pie in the sky by and by to compensate them for the misery of their lives on earth. People need to believe in something, since I suspect the brain is wired that way, to need to interpret the world in order to be able to function effectively in it. The brain evolved to learn, to notice patterns, and to make generalizations. When I look at Oz women with a very cold anthropological masculist eye, which is my belief system, I notice that about half of them are what I call feministically arrogant. That is, they truly believe that women are the morally superior sex, that men are not to be fully trusted, since they see men, under the ideological influence of a lifetime's feminist conditioning, as oppressors, rapists, harmers of women, and hence are not to be treated as equals to women. Speaking as a masculist who has read more feminist books than 99% of feminists, my bi-consciousness, that is, having had both my feminist and my masculist consciousnesses raised, allows me to see that these monoconscious feministed women live in a quasi-delusional state that needs masculism to allow them to pull themselves out of it. There's a real unconscious arrogance about Oz women, especially amongst young women who express even a haughtiness towards men, and are rather surprised and annoyed when they look at me when I don't succumb to their monoconscious belief that women are a morally superior sex, and I don't defer to them in some sense. I find this form of monoconscious feminist unconscious arrogance very annoying. I feel, as a masculist, that it's entirely unjustified, based on false assumptions that need to be corrected, and it's the role of the masculists to do just that. I list here, off the top of my head, some of the beliefs held by Oz women, and particularly young Oz women, that the masculists need to crush, to restore a sense of reality to women's beliefs, both for women's sake and certainly for men's sake, since female monoconscious feminist beliefs are very insulting to men, who instinctively feel that women who hold these beliefs are very unpleasant to be with, who tend to be rejected by men, who, as males, don't like being treated as second-class citizens, as morally inferior as seen by monoconscious feministed women. Here's the list of commonly held beliefs amongst feministed women that the masculists, especially masculist scientists, see as myths, as fairy stories, that feminists like to tell each other since they cater to women's desperate desire to believe them, rather like a religion that brainwashes gullible minds, that there is a God who loves them, even if in the real world there is no one who loves them. For example, old women who have no family support, so flocked in earlier decades to the churches to be preached to that there is a God who loves them. They lapped it up. Similarly today, women desperately want to believe the fictions that feminism preaches to them as today's women's religion. Since masculist scientists have a very low opinion of people who have low RQs, that's reality quotients, they are motivated to crush these feminist fictions that grate against the scientific knowledge of masculist scientists. Here is an off the top of my head list. Bullet. The gender oppressors are men against women. Bullet. Women are as capable as men, given equal opportunities. Bullet. Women are as smart as men. Bullet. Women are as performant as men. Bullet. Women should have equal status in society as men. Bullet. Women deserve to be arrogant towards men, given the above. Bullet. Women are morally superior to men. Bullet. The patriarchy ought to be destroyed to liberate women. Bullet. Women should continue to be treated by men as privileged princesses. Bullet. Men exist on this earth to pay for women to have babies. Bullet. Fat women are beautiful. I will now discuss these bulleted points one by one, refuting them with masculist ideas, and particularly with masculist science. The aim here is to crush monoconscious feminist delusions, so that men can be liberated from female oppression, so that feminists can acquire a higher degree of reality, a higher RQ, and hence be more respected by masculists, especially by masculist scientists. Bullet. The gender oppressors are men against women. If you're a monoconscious feminist, then the above statement seems self-evident, given no contrary evidence to the idea that gender oppression is a one-way street. But nearly all feminists are what the masculists call monoconscious. That is, they have only had their feminist consciousnesses raised and know nothing about masculist ideas, so are blissfully unaware how women oppress men, and far worse, since women's oppression of men is continuous and lasts decades. For example, women's financial parasitism, women's manslavery for decades, women's fluffy feminist hypocrisy in the divorce courts, women's many decades-lasting gender crimes against men, for example, paternity fraud, pill lying, women's tooth and nail opposition to the legislation of the that's paternity rejection right, etc. Masculists demand that women become more bi-conscious by studying masculist ideas, so that they give up their suffocating monoconscious attitudes towards men, when in reality it is women who are the greater gender oppressors. It is the task of the masculists to teach society of this basic truth. Bullet. Women are as capable as men, given equal opportunities. No, the reality is that women have 10% smaller brains than men, This simple, single fact utterly crushes any pretense that the feminists have of pretending that women are men's equals, when they have 10 billion fewer neurons in their brains, hence 10% less neural processing capacities than men, so contribute almost nothing to the development of world culture, building nothing, inventing nothing, creating nothing. Women have always been parasites of men, being unable to hunt, to plough, to fight, relying on men to create the cultures that women live off, parasite off. Women are dumber than men by 4 IQ points on average, an obvious consequence of women's hypergamy, that is, the female instinct to mate up, to obtain the superior DNA of a superior man for her kids, so that her kids have superior DNA compared to her, which is good for the species, so evolved, and all women have it. Women have a 10% lower IQ variance than men, so that the morons and the genii are males. So it's not surprising that women have won a pathetic 1% of science Nobel Prizes. Women lack genius, so incapable of winning the world's top prizes and reaping the rewards given to the most prestigious people, who are nearly always men. Women have 10 times less testosterone in their blood, so are much less aggressive, ambitious, dogged, persistent, so greatly underperform compared to men, so deserve their inferior status in society, since women are incapable of earning the same level of respect given to men, because men vastly outperform women at the top end of the performance scale. Women have always been merely tolerated by men due to women's 2 traditional monopolies of vagina and womb. Men are forced to be nice to women because men want to penis them. Women's only real source of attraction to men are their vaginas, but women are about to lose these 2 monopolies to male engineering genius. The sex bots are coming out now with their luscious curves, their film star faces, their creamy grippy vaginas that women cannot compete with, and Japanese scientists have already grown a goat in an artworm, that's artificial womb. So soon, men will be able to grow their own kids and prefer to sex their bots rather than sexing feministed fat women who will be increasingly ignored by men. Bullet. Women are as smart as men. No, women are dumber than men by 4 IQ points on average, as shown by modern research. This lower intelligence of women is to be expected as a simple consequence of women's hypergamy, always aiming to mate up with the superior man to obtain his DNA for her kids. Women have a 10% lower IQ variance, so the morons and the genii are males, who win nearly all the science Nobel Prizes. Knowing the average IQs of men and women, and the 2 standard deviations for men and women, the 2 IQ bell curves can be readily calculated, and hence from these the proportions of men to women at various IQ levels can be calculated. Since men are smarter than women and have a larger IQ variance, one deduces, that is, one can calculate, that at full professor level in pure mathematics, only about 10% of full professors are female. At the Fields Medal or Abel Prize level, that's in brackets, the male equivalent of the Science Nobel Prize, the calculation predicts that only 1 woman a century wins one of them, and that is the reality. Women are not as smart as men, and like the blacks, will simply have to accept their intellectual genetic inferiority. If they don't, then masculine scientists will only harangue them all the more for being isinate, fairy, PC, ignorami peasants. Bullet. Women are as performant as men. No. Women have 10 times less testosterone than men, so are much less driven, less ambitious, so women's performance track record is grossly inferior to men's. You only have to look at the entries in the book Who's Who in America or Who's Who in the World, which contain the bios of famous people. These books are utterly dominated by men. Everyone has heard the term great man, but the term great woman sounds almost like an oxymoron. So few times have women ever made a great contribution to humanity. This is the end of part 1.